hero. What the hell am I even talking about? I can't even save myself. A statue carrying a spear would jab it into Cranel's gut. He'd cough up blood as blood would cover his entire front torso as he gets thrown into the air. Landing on top of the altar as his ribs would shatter. He'd cough blood as blood would fall into his eyes, his sclera becoming red. He would see it, the sword of the final statue ready to swing down and chop him in two, ending his life. Damn it, it's not fair. If only I had another chance. As the sword would swing down, time would come to a standstill.
Notification. The secret quest, Courage of the Weak, has been completed. Congratulations, you have earned the right to become a player. Will you accept? If you refuse, your heart will stop at approximately 0.02 seconds. Will you accept?
What if Cranel from Danmachi, or is it wrong to try and pick up girls in the dungeon, had the system from solo leveling? Just like Sung Jinwoo. The story will cover a world where Belle never met Hestia, where the rulers and the monarchs of solo leveling are now entering into the world of Danmachi. So, let's get right into it.
Huh? What's this?
A veteran member of the Soma Familia would say in a surprised tone. But who wouldn't be surprised to have found this wall collapse and this strange door behind it? This was pretty much unprecedented for the first 5 floors. And although they were a party of 8, 6 of them were actual adventurers, while 2 of them were porters, or supporters. That being Lily Ruka, who'd been with them for a while, who was training her replacement. This white-haired brat from the countryside, who had come begging to their door saying he'll do anything so he can become an adventurer. He didn't even get a falna. He had just been begging at the door, hoping for some work because no one had taken him. Wannabe adventurers. All a waste of space. The fact they managed to get him inside without being suspected is hilarious, because typically the guild wouldn't allow any adventurers without a falna to enter into the dungeon, having to require adventurers to be a part of a familia. Well, if this mission went well, they'd let this Belle kid into the Soma Familia, and then he'd owe them money for life after he got a taste of that alcohol. But enough of that. The new kid would be talking to their other supporter, that being Miss Lily Ruka. She already owed Master Soma a fairly large debt, but she knew what she was doing, so she was basically teaching him the ropes before he would be added to their familia. Of course, this wasn't out of the goodness of her own heart, but more so the fact that she was trying to train her replacement so she could leave. The older adventurer would return, asking everyone if they'd like to enter this strange door, with new parts of the dungeon being discovered all the time on the lower floors. But something like this was unheard of. A few of the newer adventurers were way too excited to go in, saying that this could be a huge chance to make some money, boss, while the older senior adventurers were heeing and hawing, debating on if they should report this to the guild. But considering that they could find something rare and valuable, and even get more of Master Soma's wine, it was a chance they were willing to take. The large burly man, the leader of this party, would open the doors, walking inside as it would just be a long, endless darkness. This was pretty odd, considering that, well, all the upper floors had some lighting. This kind of atmosphere was more typical for the middle or deep floors. But what kind of adventurers are scared of the dark? Whatever. The party would continue onward its trek, walking for over 20 minutes, until eventually they came to another set of doors. These doors would be large and grandiose, with 2 blazers standing outside with flames coming out of them. Quite literally, the light at the end of the tunnel. As the party of adventurers would swallow hard, gulping as they opened the large stone doors, they would see a ginormous room. It could easily be as large as the entire center of Aurario. How is this even inside of the dungeon up here? This is impossible. Upon entering into the large room, the first thing that Belle would notice as he looks to the right and left is these strange statues. Some of them holding weapons, some holding strange instruments, but of course everyone's eyes would be drawn to the center. The very center of this large room would feature a throne, and upon it, a gigantic stone statue. This kind of man-made architecture inside of the dungeon, this is completely unprecedented. Belle had even heard stories of things like this in the hero stories that his grandfather had once told him. "Mr. Greer, have you ever seen a room like this before?" Greer, the main and head of the party, would bark back at Belle.
No. Now stop asking questions, let's keep going. I smell something big here, and my nose is never wrong.
Belle would look to his mentor, Lily, who would just shake her head side to side, with her sighing and shrugging, as they continued carrying their large bags towards the center of the room. One of the other party members would be a mage, and thus would instantly recognize the ancient script text on the center of this strange stone tablet, while the others would be walking around, half astonished at just the sheer scale of this room. She would begin reading aloud the ancient script carved into this stone tablet. As she began to read this ancient writing, Belle would turn looking at the statue holding it, as he would see its dark face covered by shadow, stone wings carving around it, like an angel. Its hands gripping the tablet. The mage of the party would continue reading. "These are the rules of the Carthenon Temple. First, worship the Lord. Second, thou shalt praise the Lord. And third, you must prove your faith." Upon finishing reading these aloud for the entire group to hear, the massive stone doors behind the group that the party had entered into this room through would slam shut. Wham! Wham! One of the party members, a level 3 adventurer, would start freaking out, saying, "There's no way. This is not part of the dungeon. I've never heard of anything like this before. I'm leaving," as he would get up and start walking away from the group. As he gets closer to the door though, Belle would suddenly see it before anyone else. Belle Cranel would shout out, "Mr. Peak, look above you!" As the adventurer would look up saying, "Huh?" A stone axe would come crashing down to the ground, severing his head from his body, as blood would pool at his feet, his flesh falling over to the ground. The other adventurers would gasp, pulling out their weapons, as they say that these statues, they must be monsters! And Lily would pull out her crossbow, firing it at one of the statues, the arrow barely even doing anything, leaving but a scratch on its stone skin. Belle would be breathing heavily, watching the blood pooling at the man's feet, who had been alive mere seconds ago. Lily would suddenly grab Belle's sleeve. She would quickly whisper to Belle, saying, "Mr. Cranel, I think its eyes are moving." Belle would turn, looking up at the large statue, large being a comical word to describe it, more like gargantuan. The huge statue, and oh my god. Belle saw it. No, he felt it. From the months that he had come to Aurario and had been trying his best to get into Familia, he had taken on any number of odd jobs, a number of which having risked his own life to achieve. And all of it without being an adventurer or having a Falna. In this closeness to death that he'd experienced, he knew right now the chill down his spine. He would scream out for everyone to get down as the eyes would begin to glow a yellow, bright orange. Another adventurer having run towards the doors, trying to slash at the statue. A bright flash of burning light would come crashing from the giant's face as it eviscerates the entire body of the adventurer who had been running at the doors, his feet falling to the ground as the rest of his body would just be gone, completely evaporated in one hit. That was a level 2 adventurer. Belle will be thinking, there's no way. He got completely destroyed in one attack. How powerful is this thing? Belle had managed to save 6 of his party's lives, 2 having been casualties just after mere moments of entering the room. After almost 40 seconds of everyone having dodged to the ground, Belle would look up at the statue as he slowly crouches up, telling everyone to wait. Everyone would watch as Belle slowly raises his knees and immediately would let go as he falls back to the ground, the eyes having begun charging up as he would shake with fear. I was right. Belle knew that by rising above a certain height, the statue would attack them, saying that if they stayed low to the ground like this, they wouldn't be attacked. Greer would then yell at Belle, asking,
"So what, are we supposed to stay like this forever?"
Belle would move his eyes towards their party's mage, asking her to repeat the rules she had read originally off that stone tablet. Once again, she would repeat the commandments of the Carthenon Temple. Thou shalt worship God. Thou shalt praise God. Thou shalt prove thy faith. Those who fail to obey these commandments shall not be spared. Eventually, with some trial and error, the party would figure out that they need to bow to this god. They need to praise it. Everyone would be horrified with gods in this world being commonplace, of course, since they descended hundreds of years ago. Bowing before a god? That was pretty much draconian at this point. As the 6 members would bow before the huge stone statue, suddenly Bell would hear a crunching sound as he looks up, seeing its face contort into a wicked smile. That is the look of a demon, not a god. The statue would be gazing down at them as they bowed before it, clearly entertained and amused at the turn of events. The statue would begin to stand, its twisted grin only emulating its size, as suddenly it would take a step forward. Stomp! Again, the party would now turn back to their mage. Now what? Now what do we do? What's happening? Stomp! The statue would take another step forward. Stomp! It's getting closer. Okay, we've worshipped God, Bell would say, the sweat now pooling down his brow. Now we have to praise this god. The mage, who had been one of Soma's elites for quite some time before being dethroned, would step forward saying that she knows best how to pray to a god, saying that she had prayed to Soma many times, hoping for his divine wine, saying that if there's anything to stop this monster, it would be the power of Lord Soma. And so she would stand before the statue, clasping her hands up like holding for a cup. She begins reciting, basically begging for alcohol, which in itself is pretty hilarious. But the statue, it wouldn't stop. Stomp, stomp, stomp. No, if anything, the statue was getting faster as it began to approach the level 3 mage. Stomp, stomp. Her prayers would be silenced as the other adventurers would gasp out in horror. There were 5 left, as the poor mage would be crushed to death under the ginormous foot of this stone god. The adventurers would scramble, running, as all of them were thinking, desperately racking their brains on how they can get out of this alive. Bell would tear off his large bag, throwing it to the ground as he rips off Lily's bag, picking her up and carrying her as he runs, with him trying his best to save both of them. Lily would ask what he's doing, saying this is stupid, saying they're both going to die, before the statue could reach them. Bell's eyes would turn, watching as he sees the statues around them, remembering again the strange statues that had musical instruments. He'd suddenly scream out into the room, hoping that the others would hear, saying, "The instruments! Get by a statue with an instrument!" As he runs towards one carrying a harp, he would stand there with Lily, hoping for something to happen. Greer, the leader of the adventurer party, would reach the center of another stone statue, this one carrying a trumpet. As a horn would echo throughout the room, Bell would realize that the statues can only take one person as he drops Lily to her feet and runs to another statue. Lily would watch in horror as Bell is getting chased down by the statue. Bell would desperately look for anyone that had a musical instrument, but the stone foot would be coming down on him. He ducked to the side, crashing out of the way, as he could feel the vibrations of the floor shattering beneath the behemoth's feet. Bell would look up, realizing that the statue he's in front of is carrying a sword. Bell would leap back, off of his feet, scrambling, but his leg would get severed off by the clean blade. Bell would scream out in utter agony, feeling his leg ripped from his body as he feels the blood pooling out of his leg. Bell, with both of his arms, would scramble as he pulls himself across the floor, a trail of blood following his severed leg. As he reaches in front of a statue, his eyes now watering, as he looks up and sees her begin to sing. The statue would have saved him, just as the large statue was about to crush him to death. The demonic smile of this god statue would return to normal, but this time to a frown, seemingly disappointed that it hadn't been able to claim more prey. The statue would walk back solemnly, taking a seat in its throne, its eyes now returning to a motionless gaze, as if though it had never been alive to begin with. In the center of the room, we would see a circular disc now rotating as it rips out of the floor, an altar. This is when they would remember, now that the mage was gone, scrambling to remember what the 3rd commandment was. Thou shalt prove thy faith? As they were all trying to come up with how they could prove their faith to this god, they would begin thinking of, well, how humans had been proving their faith sacrifices to gods. All of the other adventurers would turn looking at Bell, his leg already ripped off and ruined. There was no way he could live a life as an adventurer anymore at this point, especially considering he doesn't even have a Falna. They would all be thinking the same thing. Lily wouldn't even hesitate to suggest it. I think we should put Cranel in the center of this altar. Bell would look horrified watching as the others' eyes gaze at him, singling him out, once again, because of his weakness, because he wasn't a part of the Familia. He was alone. Because of that, it was natural they would choose to sacrifice him, of course. Bell would grit his teeth as sweat begins draining down his face as Grease would approach him, grabbing him by the collar of his neck by his shirt and pulling him up. Without the least care in the world, the older adventurer, a level 3, would easily throw Bell on top of the altar, his blood splattering across it, as a blue flame would open up on the altar. The others would be confused, wondering what's going on, as for a few minutes they'd watch, hoping something would happen. During these few minutes, Bell would have ripped off a sleeve of his shirt and tied it around his leg, stopping the bleeding, as he was just hoping that he would somehow make it out of this, not wanting this to be his fate. Damn them! If I was a powerful adventurer, or I had my own familia, I wouldn't be doing this. This was my only option. As Grease would pick up Lily and throw her into the circle next, weakest of all and all that, another blue flame would start. But again, nothing would happen. The adventurers would grumble as they would then walk into the circle, with Lily now rubbing her face to push the dirt off of it. She'd look at Bell, who was clearly freaking out as his eyes were twitching, watching as all of the adventurers around them had entered the circle. Suddenly, the statues began moving, as a blue flame would have come out of their eyes, almost matching the blue flames now in this circle. Suddenly, some of the flames around them would begin going out, as the adventurers would be shaking, carrying their swords, as they look at the huge stone statues now approaching them. Some of them would not be moving though. Bell would cough up blood as he says that they need to keep an eye on all of the statues. We can all make it out of here alive if we can watch them. They won't move if you're keeping your eyes on them. The other adventurers would be doubtful of him, even though he'd been right this far. But as they watch, some of the statues would be breaking through their line of sight. And naturally, one of the adventurers would break, saying, he's got a family and he's got a dream to live. He's going to become the top adventurer in Aurario. He can't die here. Just as he was saying this, one of the blue flames would go out, and the doors would begin sweeping open, just a crack. The doors having opened would bring a cool wind into them. This would be a false hope. Bell would realize this is what they meant by testing and proving their faith. If they all stayed here together, it was possible they would all survive. But the adventurer who had just spoken would leave the circle, running at full speed as he escapes out of the doors. Greers and the other adventurers would look to each other, watching and wondering if he had actually made it out alive. As the blue flames kept ticking down, Lily Rook would be the next to leave, saying she's not dying here. She'd get up running as Bell would watch, holding his hand out, saying, "No! If we lose another person!" As Lily would escape the room, the other adventurers would have lost their nerve, with Grease saying, "Sorry, kid. Looks like the sacrifice plan is the game after all." Grease would ditch his sword, dropping it next to the altar, and running, pushing Bell off of it as he begins running towards the doors. The other adventurers would pretty much make the same choice, all of them leaving the circle as the flames would be more than halfway ticked down. Bell would scream, casting his hand out as he says, "No! Don't!" And he'd be left alone. The doors, now, almost completely shut, with just a sliver between them. Bell would move his hand, with it twitching, with the blood that he had lost earlier. He'd reach out for the higher quality sword. As he can barely hold it, he'd look at the monsters approaching him, the stone statues. He can barely keep his eyes moving on all of them. "If I'm dying here, I'm taking at least one of you with me." Bell would grit his teeth again, as the statues would be approaching, the flames going down, still ticking. Suddenly, he would have lost eye contact with one of them, as its blade would come down, Bell moving barely out of the way, his shoulder getting cut on the edge as the sword crashes into the altar. When Bell flinched, his eyes would have closed for a moment, the other statues moving forward, as he tries to wiggle his way around the altar. But it would be too late. The statues would be fully depending on him. 2 flames left. "A hero? What the hell am I even talking about? I can't even save myself." A statue carrying a spear would jab it into Cranel's gut. He'd cough up blood as blood would cover his entire front torso as he gets thrown into the air. Landing on top of the altar as his ribs would shatter. He'd cough blood as blood would fall into his eyes, his sclera becoming red. He would see it, the sword of the final statue ready to swing down and chop him in two, ending his life. Damn it, it's not fair. If only I had another chance. As the sword would swing down, time would come to a standstill.
Notification. The secret quest, Courage of the Weak, has been completed. Congratulations, you have earned the right to become a player. Will you accept? If you refuse, your heart will stop in approximately 0.02 seconds. Will you accept?
Yes. And with that, the curtain calls on our prologue to our story. Bell would wake up, outside. He wasn't in the dungeon anymore? How is that possible? As he would sit up, he would look down, seeing that both of his legs were attached. Was it all a dream? But that couldn't be possible. He remembered everything. As he feels his hands, he would feel no injuries at all, wondering what the heck is going on. Bell would look around, realizing that he's at the Adventurers Guild. He'd only been in there one time when he had first arrived in Aurario, but they had told him that he couldn't become an adventurer unless he joined a familia, so he had been turned away. The elf girl with brown hair and long ears would enter the room. Bell had already heard stories from his grandfather about elves before, so he was, needless to say, excited. Bell would sit up sharp as he's blushing, saying, nice to meet you, miss. It's Aina. Oh, Miss Aina. So, Bell would have successfully met Aina. Aina would frown, saying a couple of adventurers from the Loki familia had found him on the 5th floor, completely unconscious and alone. They said they had no records of him being a part of any familia or being under anyone here at the guild, so how did he even get into the dungeon? There was no way Bell could out himself as having illegally gone inside the dungeon with the Soma familia, much less get their wrath on him. Bell would quickly stand up and run out of the guild hall saying, "Thanks for taking care of me," as Aina would hold her hand up saying, "Hey, wait, get back here," as Bell flees out into the street and runs across it, now successfully having escaped the Adventurers Guild. Bell would keep running until he made it all the way to Daedalus Street. After breathing heavily, he would say, "Well, that was scary. But why didn't she ask about this thing?" As Bell would look up at the sky, he would see a giant panel. The blue glass-like panel would be somewhat transparent, as Bell reaches forward touching it, pulling his hand back quickly. Inside of the panel it would say, "Congratulations on becoming a player." As Bell reads this, it would open up, showing the rewards given to him for becoming a player. At the same time, it would also provide him with his daily quest. Bell would know what quests are, but he's not necessarily sure what a daily quest is, with Bell being more familiar with the heroic quests that he saw in books growing up, like those long, never-ending journeys. Bell would have no idea how to interact with this thing, so he'd try all sorts of things by touching it, poking at it, but nothing seemed to be working. Finally, Bell would sigh, saying, "What the heck is a daily quest anyway?" Bell would ignore the rewards that he had been given for now, not even knowing how to look at them anyway. But what his eyes would focus on is his stats. There's no way. Is this what it's like to get a Falna? That's gotta be it. I guess this is just how it is when you get a Falna. So did a god come by the dungeon and give me a Falna and make me a part of their familia? Bell would be confused looking at his stats, as it shows player, level 1. Stats, strength 10, vitality 10, intelligence 10, perception 10, agility 11. I guess I can just see how fast I am. That's what agility is, right? Your speed? Bell would look over to the other screen, once again looking at this daily quest and seeing quest info, daily quest, train to become a formidable combatant. Goals, push-ups, 0 out of 100. Sit-ups, 0 out of 100. Squats, 0 out of 100. Running, 3 out of 10 km. Huh. So it looks like this goes up whenever I actually do that exercise, huh? But working out doesn't make you stronger, you have to kill monsters and get Excelia. Even Bell knew that from just his grandfather. Bell would then look at the bottom of the daily quest info. Caution. If the daily quest remains incomplete, penalties will be given accordingly. Underneath that was a strange-looking symbol like a clock, although it had 2 hinges on top of it, unlike a grandfather or bell tower. Bell's stomach would grumble, realizing he hasn't eaten anything in a while, glad that he got that frontward payment from the Soma Familia. Before he even realized it, it seemed night had come. As Bell was heading back towards the slums of Orario, where he could at least try to find somewhere to stay for the night, he would smell something delicious. As he feels the coins jingling in his pocket, he would find himself walking into the Hostess of Fertility. A waitress with silver hair and silver eyes would peek out of the restaurant, asking him if he wanted something to eat. Bell would smile, saying, "Yeah, that sounds great," as he comes inside. It turns out the Loki Familia would be there as well, as Bell would see the golden-haired Kenki, or the Sword Princess, Eyes Wallenstein. Sitting next to her were 2 Amazonian girls, as well as a gray-haired, wolf-eared boy, who was probably a couple years older than Bell was. This guy would be watching Bell enter the bar, his eyes piercing him like daggers. At that moment, Bell would feel his gaze drift away as he looks quickly away from the man. By this time, Seer would have introduced herself to Bell and have him sit at the counter, asking him if he's an adventurer, noticing his equipment's all torn up. Bell would laugh if he can even call this equipment, and tell her that yes, he's an adventurer. "Oh, then have you been in the dungeon before? What familia are you part of?" Yeah, I've been in the dungeon before. That's how I got all ripped up, right?" Bell would think to himself, thinking he was planning to join the Soma Familia, if only to get a Falna so he could go into the dungeon. But now, it seems he has a Falna already, so there's no reason for him to go back there since he never officially joined and doesn't owe them anything. And considering how they left him to die, it's at this point that Beta would have been getting rather drunk, as he starts complaining about that guy who he had found on their way back, saying he smelled disgusting and he hated weaklings, all covered in blood, couldn't even make it down past the 5th floor. And he was a civilian! I can't believe they even let him into the dungeon! Eyes and her party had been the ones to find Bell when they had been leaving the dungeon from their exploration. Bell would sit there clenching his teeth as he listens to Beta talking trash about him, before he gets up and starts running out of the bar. He just couldn't take it anymore. Everyone looking down on him. Damn him. If I was stronger. If I was... As Beta would laugh, saying, "Look at the crybaby. That's the guy from earlier." Bell would run out of the door, but just as he took a step outside of the hostess of fertility, he would vanish. And without paying the tab. Mamma Mia would not be pleased. Meanwhile, Bell would open his eyes, seeing a red sun. He was in the middle of a hot, scorching desert. What's going on? Bell would wonder, as he looks, seeing the screen pop up in front of him. This Falna, or whatever it is. The screen would say, "Notice, you have failed to complete your daily quest. You will be transferred to the penalty zone for an allotted amount of time." Just as he would read this, it would disappear, as he would see a new timer ticking down. It would show 4 hours, 00000 out of 4 hours. Bell would be confused, but suddenly a gigantic red centipede would rip out of the sand behind him, scrawling at him, making this ear-piercing screech. Bell would be horrified, realizing that everything hadn't been a dream. He wasn't just hallucinating, this was real. Bell would pull himself to his feet, running as he's screaming from this monster, trying his best not to die. Bell would run endlessly for 4 hours, escaping life and limb, trying to save himself from these huge monsters, screaming and wondering if he'd been sent inside the dungeon or where this place was, what the hell was going on. After 4 hours had passed, Bell would have been screaming for the entire time, as both Bell and Sand from the penalty zone would be sent back into the reality of Orario. It was well into 4 o'clock in the morning at that point, and Bell's scream would cause some of the girls inside of the Hostess of Fertility to wake up, with Bell appearing in front of the stairs and falling down them, a pile of sand at his feet being thrown around like dust. Completely unconscious, Bell would be taken in by Seer and the other girls, with Seer saying she knows this customer from earlier this night. Seer would watch over Bell until he wakes up, with him realizing that he's back, and apologizing profusely to Mamma Mia and the others. He would pay for his meal plus some, pretty much spending all of the money that he had earned from the Soma Familia on that adventure. By the time that all had ended and Bell was recovered enough to leave, he would again apologize profusely before realizing that it's noon, wondering if there's anything he needs to do, aside from now finishing this daily quest thing. Bell would quickly run around Aurario, making it to Daedalus Street and just running laps through it, as he finishes the running and would see a green check mark appear. Next, he would do push-ups, testing and seeing what counts as a push-up, doing all 100 including push-ups, sit-ups, squats, curl-ups, and more. Having finished all of the goals for the day, he would successfully have completed the daily quest, being given rewards. Oh, yeah, rewards, right? After saying that, Bell would see his rewards screen open up. Bell would see once the screen opens up that he had received multiple rewards, one of these being the one from the Courage of the Weak quest that had made him a player to begin with. Whenever he rests, his regeneration is higher. He's completely immune to all poisons? That's an ability that only leveled up adventurers typically get. And it applies to all toxins? He'd scroll down looking at the other rewards, seeing Penalty Quest, Survival Reward. Bell would receive +3 stat points, wondering if these points are what's added to his individual stats. He would put all 6 points that he had earned from both the Penalty Quest and his daily quest from today into Strength. Bell would then also use this Status Recovery, as he feels himself being completely recharged. All of his fatigue from earlier completely wiped away. He would also open both of the random loot box rewards, with Bell receiving a quill and tissues. Bell would quickly put these back into inventory, after discovering he had an inventory. As soon as he discovers this inventory feature, Bell would be amazed. This would make being a supporter so much easier if he has to go into that work again. At this point, Bell would discover he actually had Greer's sword, the one that he had left behind when he had been abandoned on the altar. Bell would reach for it, pulling it out of the screen, as an electric blue light would rip forth as he removes the sword, the blade being completely clean, as if though it had never been damaged from those stone statues. Bell would continue his daily quest for the next week, completing it every day and adding all of his points to strength. After this, he would have 27 points in strength, and he could feel it. His muscles have been getting bigger. It's like as if though he had been training in the dungeon or working out, and it actually was working, way faster than he thought it would. Bell could practically feel it. He felt like he was ready to take on a monster. It would be on the 7th day after completing his daily quest that he would receive something interesting. An instance dungeon key. It would show the item rarity of this key being C rank. While he wasn't sure what that meant, he did know one thing. This was unique. All of his drops so far from these loot boxes had been pretty much random stuff that he couldn't even sell. Just things like tissues or flowers or really random stuff. But this key was different. In the item description of the key, it would say, "This item is usable on the 3rd floor of the Tower of Babel," that being the tower the dungeon is hosted under. Bell wondered if there was some sort of room in the dungeon this key could be used for, maybe to help him get stronger. Bell would pocket it in his inventory for now. Knowing that this was how he was going to get stronger, he would book off of work tomorrow, deciding not to take any odd jobs and take down this instance dungeon. As the next day would arrive, Bell would go as early as possible, sneaking in between a crowd of adventurers before the guild could check him and inside of the dungeon, where Bell would then make it to the 3rd floor and follow the key's directions, walking to a seemingly nondescript wall. As he pulls the key out, holding it towards the wall, a blue portal would open, ripping through the air, as Bell would take his first step inside of the instance dungeon, where he'll have to fight the boss, Kasaka. If you guys enjoyed part 1 for What If Bell Had Solo Leveling, then make sure to hit the like button, comment down below what you thought, and subscribe to the channel for any more future content. Part 2 will be dropping next week. I'll see you then. Ciao.